So today I'm going to focus on the topic of 4IR supply chain and Africa, and I thought it would make sense to break that up into the different sections that make up the title. I think the first thing, just very briefly, I've got a very long career focused in the IT space, working for companies or tech firms of different sizes, from bootstrap to rapid growth to mature. And my journey of interest and passion in academia has evolved from computer science to industrial psychology to corporate strategy and innovation that I focus on right now. I work for SAP as a day job, and essentially I'm part of an innovation office with a regional remit. My focus is looking at Africa, and essentially what we do is we try to apply the mindset of futurism into the practical challenges that organizations have to move a little bit further along a digital maturity curve. So this is a little bit about the team that I form part of. So 4IR, Fourth Industrial Revolution, it's actually a fairly simplified topic if you try and put it into a nutshell. Essentially, it's about trying to take ways of converting standard business to standard operations, standard equipment and assets and other types of components that you typically have in a business, and connecting it. So adding Wi-Fi, adding sensors, adding the ability to talk to other things as well. And I like to think of it in a simplified manner, because if you think about where companies are starting from, right, they all have a different starting point. You might find that in one country, a business that does logistics or deliveries might already be looking at how they can digitize their fleet, whereas in another country they may simply be looking at how to implement cold chain solutions, whereas in another country the cold chain solutions might be live in real time, understanding exactly what's going on and to what extent they might expect faults or defective products or waste products by the time it gets to the customer. So this benchmark of trying to drive a maturity curve or a maturity progress or state it's important to understand the context and understand where a company, a country, or even an industry sector is starting to get to that point. So in order to do that, we need to look at what Africa currently has as strengths and challenges. The first thing is it's big. It's 50 odd countries, many languages and dialects that are serviced. You've got the red items of a year are so-called high-risk travel zones. So suddenly you have people considering the impact of sending their employees, of doing business, of having to travel into those countries for not just leisure, but for work purposes as well. And big chunks of Africa that represent the highest danger zones in the world. Then you look at the types of products that are being produced, or the raw materials that are coming from or natural resources and other types of materials that are coming from Africa, and it's rich, not just in terms of jewels and metals, but also in terms of products that you can have. So there is this ability for Africa to service Africa, and as well for Africa to service the rest of the world. And then if you look at it in terms of landmass, again, it's a huge piece of or subset of the entire globe's land composition that we have. If you look at China, pretty much taking up the bulk of the southern or sub-Saharan parts of Africa. And then looking at what the future looks like in terms of megacities, you already have Cairo, Lagos, and Kinshasa that are listed amongst the urban areas with more than 10 million people being resident. And by the time we hit 2030, we're expecting another 2 on the African continent, and that's being 2 out of the 6 that are expected to be focused on being declared megacities. In terms of population, this is the Pew Research Center stating that by 2100 or 2100, Africa will only be second to Asia in terms of people. So very much the continent will have to focus on how to thrive, how to cater for itself, how to cater for the world, and also trying to understand how to become a leader and a global player in many different perspectives. If you look at the fastest growing cities, we've got Lagos, Kinshasa, Cairo, Luanda. Nice to see South Africa down there as well. But still, there's a lot of potential. There's a lot of opportunity. There's a lot of natural or unknown resource that can be tapped into as the demand changes for different types of products and services, and as the global supply chain landscape evolves, so that we can start servicing people on the continent, but also using continental resources to push out to everybody else. But then you look at GDP, and at the moment, as it stands, Africa is the few blocks in purple. It's only a tiny, tiny player in the global economy as it stands. So what are some of the challenges? We've got very real challenges in terms of trying to find balance. Being based in Cape Town, we've recently gone through water shortages. We go through electricity blackouts fairly frequently. And one of the interesting things is that you can live in a city like Cape Town, which you could argue is not third world by modern standards, but at the same time, you can be prone to being impacted by different levels of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So, for example, a water shortage, you still need physiological items like water, air, quality, food, shelter, that type of thing. But at the same time, you have people that are struggling with those, but they're filling self-esteem needs, where they are writing or they are teaching or they're doing some other type of higher order activity that feeds their own personal makeup, right? So that balance is really complex, and it sort of creates this notion of a tale of two cities. If you look at what it translates in the supply chain context, you have cases where companies are looking at outsourcing their supply chain to, especially for last mile delivery, where they are looking to cater for a safe way to get the product to the customer. And so much so that they would remove the branding from the vehicles that are traveling to those customers. We've got a video clip here of one of the beverage brands where the truck was broken down, and because of the opportunity, people will start looting. And you've got somebody there with a school uniform on that's jumping back into a car. And even though they probably could cater for completely different things in their normal way of life, it's this type of opportunistic situation that causes real issues to supply chain, logistics, and other types of businesses that are involved in that type of distribution model. Then at the same time, we've got the problem of rural bases, of people having to walk to go and get simple resources. You've got extreme poverty in many cases. You've got overdevelopment in other cases that creates issues around transportation. And then you need to think about last mile being delivered through modern technologies like drones and other autonomous vehicles. But to give you an example of how this is completely imbalanced, this is slightly dated, but essentially what it's suggesting is that a multinational brand like Coca-Cola, has the ability to get its product into every corner store or every informal store on the continent, right? But pharmaceutical companies are unable to distribute medicines with the same reach. And this is where you start striking up partnerships, where you have a company like Coke with its amazing distribution network that can then help other sectors to distribute their products to the same far-reaching destinations as well. So there's an imbalance, and that's what's really challenging about the continent, and having a level of consistency. And that's also made worse by things like the high cost of data, the access to certain technology, again, the different levels at which companies or countries or sectors are starting on that maturity model for digital modernization. You've got other issues like historical dependency on external innovation coming from outside the continent. You've got historical community establishment. If you think of South African apartheid, for example, based on conflict or disaster, or based on political preferences. And then also, you could argue that there's a lack of global attention to what Africa is saying to the rest of the world as well. So where are the opportunities? Number one, farming, right? There's enough land. As we focus on things like hydroponics, as we focus on different types of plant life that can actually grow under extreme situations, but at the same time looking at how to move to precision farming and adopt certain technologies. The cost of production over time becomes cheaper, and actually buying locally or distributing within the continent or abroad from local establishments becomes much more of a viable economical consideration. At the same time, solar farm, solar power generation, we've got huge potential to tap into that even more, and to be supplying not just within a country, but also across borders on the continent, or creating separate sub-economies off the back of this as well. And then the use of other types of technologies, not just in maintaining the, let's call it the farm to consumer type of value chain, but also for finding ways in which we can use the technology to help us drive supply chain improvement, but also to understand how to become more of a player in the technology space to then supply other supply chain players with smarter technology that we've seen benefit the continent. The other advantage is there's a lot of investment in terms of the continent, in terms of startups, smaller businesses, venture capital firms. Africa and different countries across Africa are definitely getting a lot of focus and attention to see how we can try to solve specific challenges using intellectual input and resources on the continent. So obviously I work for SAP. It's a global technology vendor. There is a perspective that the tech vendor would have. And this is a very brief glimpse on in terms of what that is. So SAP strategy right now is around Industry 4.0. So looking at how this notion of fourth industrial revolution, modernization, automation, moving to shift working by exception, moving to predictive working models, can leverage the technology to help certain industry sectors to have substantial gains in terms of process and in terms of transparency and in terms of tapping into the end-to-end value chains. There are three main areas that this focuses on. So the one is to put the customer first. And if you look at the example of the beverage versus the pharmaceuticals, that's about understanding, what is the hospital or the clinic need? What does the patient need? How do we get it to the patient in the best time frame? And that's not just looking at the logistical issues, but also looking at that from a 20-year, 30-year, 40-year, 50-year perspective to understand what the future of patient care could look like to have an impact on future planning, and how the platforms that SAP as a tech firm provides will help companies to build and become ready for that. Then the second focus is around reinventing production, so using intelligence everywhere and helping companies adopt an intelligent enterprise strategy. And then the third perspective is connecting the entire company, so across the entire supply chain. And blockchain, is one of the technologies discussed earlier, is one component that makes that viable. Essentially, what this leads to is a design to operate life cycle. So design, manufacture, deliver, operate. Design with the customer in mind, manage under or manufacture under the process efficiency, deliver in smart, real-time manner, and operate with transparency and insight so that you can move to predictive maintenance models and essentially become a slightly smarter organization across this entire customer lifetime journey. So this is the last slide in terms of the technologies involved, but essentially it's things like intelligent products, intelligent factories, intelligent assets, and empowered people across the design to operate journey. And being that SAP has got multiple lines of business, the departments that it plays in, there are other things that expand on things like customer experience, people management, and operations and finance, and so on as well. So where do you start? Right? How do you actually get started in figuring out what you can do on the continent for a particular industry in the space of digital modernization or 4IR? I like to start with questions. This is something I've posted on LinkedIn recently, and I asked people to choose just one comment and say, if you were to think of supply chain, what type of discussion would you say it is? Is it a customer experience discussion? Is it a logistics and operations discussion? Is it an HR or people discussion, or is it a digital strategy discussion? You can see that most people have voted logistics and operations, and that's a traditional view. But my perspective is that supply chain essentially is number one, it's a board level digital strategy discussion. Number two, it's about putting the customer first. So then it becomes a customer experience discussion. And number three, because we're talking about 4IR, there's a lot of co-working, there's a lot of automation, there's a lot of job transformation that's expected. So it becomes a people discussion too. But I like to start with this context and see where are the leaders of a company, where they're thinking, where they're starting from, what's the baseline that we have to work with. And what this forces you to do is ask three simple questions, right? Who are the stakeholders? Which of the stakeholders is most important at a given point in the value chain? And how can technology help me to remove the friction and add convenience for the stakeholders? I think if you start with those three questions, it will help you to put the customer first. It will help you to look at operational efficiency, but it will also help you to think, well, where does technology augment the way we work? Where does it make us smarter? How do our people adopt newer technologies? And instead of thinking of 4IR as this massive beast that you need to deal with, you start to think of incremental innovation, and maybe that leads to something radical, maybe some new operating models, and maybe some potentially new business models off the back of it as well. The second piece, just in terms of closing, is a fundamental shift, right? And if you think of how we have consumed product and innovation technologies and process and mindset, it's been a case of Africa taking global standards and applying it on the continent, okay? One of the first shifts we need to do is we need to start saying, well, we're going to start finding African solutions for African problems, okay? And we'll consume our own intelligence, our own insight in that particular space. And then the next evolution, the one that we really want to push to, is where we are creating African solutions, but they have they fit global challenges or global problems. And then we start becoming more and more ready to be a technology player, to be a key stakeholder, to be a service provider, to be a consultant in the automation space that will help companies transform their digital supply chains across whichever regions they operate in the world, but to apply that to the global context. And I think if we can face the challenges that we have with things like last mile, rural delivery, theft, concerns about security, concerns about cost, concerns about lack of quality resources on a consistent basis, and we can get it down and still have efficient, productive supply chains and logistics processes, and being data-driven and being customer-oriented, then the rest of the world can easily adapt a lot of those solutions as well. So that's it from me. With that, I'd just like to thank you for your attention.